Good decision progressed. Touch on the band, the side capsule stopped by participating using in UK to explore the stories and giving developing building news outside there for participating news, disabled people and use of their lives, student report, and generally, many of us already know we are 100% in the lead. Same this podcast is an effort to try and use the bones. So that's where we take it to our first story, and that's in speaking news service. And the headline is Edmund's Pinky Sons of Accessible Housing, so Banners and Further Bursary Procuratory Village. The Labour campaigners have demanded that the Labour government finally break its silence and take action to end the accessible housing crisis. A year ago, Inclusion London, backed by campaign allies, took their demand for the new Labour government to act on accessible housing to the gates of Canning Street. That protest was timed to coincide with the second anniversary of a pledge by the last Conservative government, which was never fulfilled, to take action to address the critical shortage of accessible housing. Now Inclusion London and other campaign organisations have used the anniversary of the Conservative pledge to call again for stricter minimum accessible standards for new build homes. They want all new build homes to meet the M42 accessible and adoptable standard, and at least 10% of all new build homes to meet the M43 ultra user standard that's suitable. How suitable for ultra use to live. Laura Vinci Nazar. Sorry, it's Laura Vinci Nanza, Senior Policy and Stakeholder Engagement Manager, Inclusion Needs this week. A year has passed when it's changed. Since they took office, they've remained silent, and accessible homes continue to be built across the country. Meanwhile, hundreds of thousands of disabled people are stuck waiting, often for decades, for an accessible social rental home, waiting for the safety and stability we need to be able to build a life. 1 in 5 disabled social housing tenants and more than 40,000 wheelchair users live in suitable homes, while only 30% of homes are basic accessibility features. She said, and she pointed to the government's commitment to build 1.5 million new homes through the current parliament, while continuing to fail to make a vital guarantee on accessibility. VC Nanza continued. Delays to the raised standards only mean that more and more people will forced to live in unsuitable conditions and have to meet the basic needs we all have for a good life. Our fight ends when our basic housing rights and needs are met. Until then, we're not going away. 3 years ago, Conservative ministers supposedly introduced rules that would force all new homes in England to be built to the M42 standards for accessibility, except for cases where this was impractical achievable. This would have meant that all new homes would need step-free access to all entrance-level rooms, as well as facilities and other features. That would make the homes more easily adaptable over time. Government opted not to introduce rules that would ensure a minimum proportion of new homes are built to the fully wheelchair accessible and M43 standard with the dedication, and while proportion of new homes must be wheelchair accessible to be left instead to local authorities and the local plans. But the M42 rules were delayed as the Conservative government said it needed to consult on the detail of the regulatory changes, something which never happened. Mikey Hard policy lead for disability rights UK said the government's essentially still relying on the goodwill of developers to create the homes we all know we need. He said little progress has been made to improve the reality of the housing crisis for disabled people. Just 9% of homes have the most basic levels of accessibility. Consultation on improving accessibility to build new homes closed it for December 2020 with an announcement to improve standards in July 2022. Yet, because of the appalling inaction of the previous and current governments, this crisis of accessible housing has been laid to worse. The Labour government's break the silence on the critical issue and lacked 200% of new build homes being built to improve accessible standards and at least 10% to wheelchair user standards is a small commitment in the grand scheme of things, but would go a long way to people just to come and assist to us. Meanwhile, you probably disintegrating better homes. So 23 people, 60% believe they've got problems moving around their home and carrying out everyday tasks without major adaptations that popped in if they were developed a health issue or serious issue, injury. More than three quarters of those surveyed, 77%, in all new homes. So the all new homes should be built to a standard that allows people to live independently if they become disabled or as they age. That's the gist of the article, and I'll just go back to what I've always said really, so I don't really understand, given the increased nature of an increase in the elderly population getting younger, and more people developing serious health conditions later in life. It's really understandable developers, queens, etc. and so forth, out searching yourself on the curves. I know, having been apart from DPR, working for DPR many years ago, that this was something that we were, many DPRs were talking about, 20 years ago, and projecting that obviously they've been increasing. Obviously, people were living longer, people were developing policies, actually not paired chronic illness sections of whatever it might be. So this was a housing crisis for instance, period. And once accessible housing, the housing policy in itself was sorting it was, and the social care crisis was sorted that many disabled political protections foresaw decades in that. Really, the housing crisis is something that could have been foresaw as well. And I don't really say, but why they're battling this, because eventually they have to be dragged kicking and screaming to the table to address these issues right down the line. I mean, you think about the amount of money that's wasted by DFG grants, hearing you out to adopt properties. Sure, makes sense. It's a common accessible framework in terms of accessible homes. Obviously, there's a cost implication to implications for materials, etc. and so forth. But the wage anxiety, the select anxiety. I expect it to be ahead of the curve, the pub trucking, which in general has them anyway, and they'll never be ahead of the curve because there's a major crisis. But in terms of this accessibility or drive, speech just makes sense. It's the way forward. That's the big crisis for the trailer bases. I lack a plan to build anyway. And when they do find land, there's obviously objections from local councils, residents, etc. and so forth. And then with the increased demands, obviously, and that lives in local businesses, new builds, you see the specifications that are being built, this housing is a lot more confined than it was 20, 30 years ago. It's a lot more, lot less space in individual properties. I guess that's a barrier as well. But, as I say, there's a aging population, so forth, with young tech impairments, otherwise, etc. and so forth. Got to find some kind of solution for the accessibility thing, really. It's a lot more difficult than it's the point specs, obviously. It's complex, but, that's why governments are in place. That's why these companies who make millions and millions, developers pay millions for in place because they're meant to be artisan architects, etc. so forth. They're all meant to be very intelligent people to design properties and find unique solutions to problems such as this, because otherwise you sort of even more problems later down the line, because you're only going to have to do the possible to set up the properties later down the line, or, as I've said previously before, the solution is to move more and more people into essential homes, but they need to be built, they need to be maintained. A lot of these residential homes, the properties that are, very, very old. These buildings are, hard to maintain, so they'll all have to be rebuilt somewhere down the line. So, again, that's not a solution in and of itself. Because, again, that's the whole thing about finding the land, building the properties, and, again, building to accessible standards. But I do think, living is towards the future. That you're saying about disabled people in terms of residential care, etc. I mean, in Japan, because they, again, talked about the lack of land and the need for housing, the need actually outstrips the availability and housing at the bottom. Also, what's going to be hard to fix, also the cost and affordability of this housing, but it's rented, which are rent masses. Even social housing renters soared in the last decade or so. So I think there's people are going to have to get used to rural living. I think flats are going to be a lot more prevalent. Obviously, they were. We've been in that cycle since the 60s. It's actually so falling. We'll go back to that because it's been, fortunately, it's the easiest way to try and manage the need to house as many people as possible. Shared housing is increasingly to be overthink in the past in terms of specific housing, like flats and units and, shares, apartments. Square Americans will bring up a think about future, hopefully with accessibility. Could even unfortunately see a future where some kind of dystopian future where, major retailers or major corporate entities end up being the biggest property developers in the country, and then you're into policing your suits from them because send of other people, the young people that be able to afford, property development, etc. and so forth, because all those costs are going up. So even property developers themselves, even the most successful ones, are struggling. In the market, I can see a future where major corporations are not just selling you stuff, but providing homes as well. And maybe even subsidising schemes, such as housing schemes, similar to the way that the banks own multibility operations and subsidise the multibility scheme. Maybe even tax breaks for your debts or income and subsidies, who knows? Just roughly. But, let's hope there's a solution on that. Next story, and babies say mums demand answers over drugs that are babies. Thomas Corzon's 25 is one about 250,000 people who were left disabled or impaired by epilepsy medicine, which was given to pregnant women, despite evidence dating back to the 1970s that sodium valproate used to cure seizures could harm a unborn child. This one child from Kifferley was never told, and that evidence was allowed for parents across the UK 5 years since the publication of the Village report, which concluded that the UK government should give compensation to those affected. Ministers have said they're still considering its findings, while victims are still waiting for answers. Joe first noticed something was different with Thomas. He referred to me some of his milestones. He was later given a diagnosis of high functioning autism, amongst other physical and neurological disabilities, but it was not until 2014 when Joe's father drew her attention to an article on how another child has been affected by sodium valproate that she drew the connection. Shortly after Thomas was diagnosed in Australia with valproate development effects after being exposed to valproate in the moon, it was like a double-edged sword, said Joe. It was nice to be put some form of label on it and have somebody finally acknowledge it, but then it really upset me to the core. I felt as though I was going to call into ball and just never stop crying. Joe started to learn about other families who had been affected and began to campaign for the UK government to take accountability, saying she and thousands of other mothers deserve answers so they could be freed from the guilt they feel. You know you can never forgive yourself was the medicine you took, as Hunter Bay said. For Thomas, his diabetes resulted in various surgeries, also leaving him struggling socially and he said any kind of public response would be needed for the damage that has been caused. I received absolutely no financial aid for the problems that no still now for my future. Absolutely nothing. I have to struggle to try to, even though I'm a little bit snub at top, he loves it. Becky Smart and be joining to some working goes not one out in Belgrade. She had already lost 2 children at when her son Zach was born, she was told he had said this, but this was a little new about Blake's cause. That's to it, said she felt dismissed by doctor. Could go to the doctor, and Zach can be self me. He could be agonizing pain, physically, emotionally, mentally, she said. All the doctors still saying, oh, well, took so well. What do you want us to do? Zach 17 has autism spectrum disorder. On social anxiety, global threatened social communications, but it struggles to talk at school. Sometimes has other thoughts. So it should. Becky provides round the clock care for years, said that it's affected her ability to earn progress for accountability support conversation. Someone has to hold hands up, so he takes what's fit, she said. All the time someone stopped doing that, their parents living guilt. And it's silly, but I've got to live it. Since the level effects, soldier about way up to large new measures have been put in place. Mitigate risks it poses to more children occurred. Showing women of childbearing potential on reliable form of contraception. More views with specialists to ensure they are on contraception that sodium valproate is still best medication for that. That's only a risk of urgent form. Nobody being prescribed the drug without 2 specialists signing a risk and relevant for agreeing no the medication is better suited for them. Decisions. Information if they're on the risk of pregnancy while on the medication. Despite the issues that emerged, sodium valproate is still an effective anti-seizure medication for many epilepsy. Called salt immunologist Owen Precrow, sitting was now used as a last resort, but for a minority of number of patients, it's still the best option. Other seizure medications don't work for some people, he said. Valproate can help them, and it enables a far better quality of life for them. He also warned people to always consult a doctor before coming off any form of medication, because although rare, people get serious injuries during seizures and people to even die. He also warned people to always consult a doctor before coming off any form of medication, because although it's rare, Department for Health and Social Care said our sympathies are with those affected and we are fully focused on how best to support patients present future harm. It's a complex day of work and is carefully considering the patient's safety because it's a vicious vehicle. Recommendations in full and we're committed to provide an update. Obviously it's a complex situation. It's always difficult when you hear these scandals. And I say scandal because it's bringing back obviously the Thalidomide scandal of the 1960s. Again, it's about individual patients that have been listened to and maybe doctors that you get the warning signs, etc. I've seen it's an ongoing case of, there'll more than likely probably be some kind of compensation scheme somewhere down the line. How far down the line I don't know. Or, it's complex, but it's a difficult one because obviously as sodium valproate is still being used for many people with epilepsy, and obviously for specialist fellows. it's still a viable option. And obviously, medical opinion is medical opinion. You just hope that there's more safeguardings in place and that, pregnancies are monitored and mm, those patients are well informed but know the risks and they're monitored every stage of the pregnancy whilst on the medication so that these things don't happen in the future. But again, that's another one of these, scandals, really. Simply because patients are being listened to. And yeah, it's difficult because if with medications being the only one that's suitable for that to be drawn, but still patients still need to be listened to if they've got serious concerns and need to be monitored, especially when pregnancy is involved, etc. and so forth. So keep an eye on that, and we hope that there's a resolution that's satisfactory to the patients and the choice of the patients, which nothing ever was supposed to some extent, because as the parents have said many times, secure there that perhaps for them will never go away. But we do hope this kind of resolution ready to conversation. Also, that lessons are learned. PLG being the same thing about lessons being learned. And time and time again, after decade, similar kind of things. Repeat. Anyway, that's all this episode. Thanks for joining us. See you again next time. Thank you. Bye.